Rain fell torrentially over Porto Alegre that November night in 2024. This wasn't ordinary rain, it was a deluge. Streets transformed into rivers, cars floated like toys, and the flood warning system wailed throughout the city. Families evacuated hastily while the Guaíba River overflowed with fury that no living person had ever witnessed. In the house of Mr. Noé Silva, yes, that was really his name, and the irony had never gone unnoticed. 3 generations of the family crowded on the upper floor, fleeing the water already invading the ground level. The lights flickered intermittently, the wind howled like a living creature, and in the midst of the chaos, the 87-year-old patriarch was strangely calm. "Grandpa, we need to leave," shouted Marina, his 29-year-old granddaughter and civil engineer, frantically checking her phone. "The water level is rising too fast. We have maybe 15 minutes before it gets dangerous." But Mr. Noé remained seated in his rocking chair, looking out the window at the storm with an expression that mixed recognition and resignation. "I've seen this before," he said calmly, voice cutting through the noise of the rain. "Not exactly this, but something very, very similar." "Grandpa, this isn't the time for stories." His son Roberto, 58, was piling valuables into plastic bags. "We need to move." "It's not a story," Noé replied, turning to face the gathered family. "It's memory of when I was Noah, the ark builder." The silence that followed was broken only by the relentless drumming of rain. "Dad, the stress of the situation is—" Roberto began. "I'm not having a breakdown," Mr. Noé interrupted firmly. "I'm perfectly lucid. And if we're potentially going to die tonight, though I don't believe we will, then I need to finally tell the truth I've kept for 87 years. Marina exchanged worried glances with her father. Grandpa had always been eccentric, but this— "Since childhood," Mr. Noé continued, "I've had memories, not of normal childhood, but of another life, another time. Memories of building an impossible vessel while everyone laughed. Memories of rain that wouldn't stop, of water rising, of the entire world disappearing beneath the waves. A particularly violent thunderclap shook the house. The lights flickered and went out, leaving them in darkness broken only by flashes of lightning. "Do you think it's coincidence that I built this house?" asked Mr. Noé in the darkness. "That it's chance that I insisted on building at the highest point in the neighborhood against all advice? That I designed the ground floor to be sacrificable, with everything important on the 2nd and 3rd floors?" "Grandpa," Marina hesitated, "that's sensible planning for a flood risk area." "It is," he agreed. "But how did I know in 1978, when I built this house, that I needed these precautions? There was no history of serious flooding here. Everyone said I was wasting money building so high, making the foundation so deep, installing redundant pumping systems in the basement." Another lightning bolt illuminated the old man's face, and Marina saw something in his expression that made her pause. Not dementia, not confusion, but absolute certainty. "Because I had already seen an entire civilization washed away by waters," said Mr. Noé. "And some part of me, the part that carries memories across lives, knew that building near water always requires respect, always requires preparation." The power returned, lights flickering back to life. Downstairs, they heard the sound of something heavy being dragged by water. "We need to decide," said Roberto. "Do we evacuate or stay?" "We stay," answered Mr. Noé with confidence. "The water will rise another meter, maybe a meter and a half. Then it will stop. It will recede. This house was built for this, to survive what's coming." "How can you know?" challenged Marina. "Meteorologists are saying it's the worst flood in 100 years, that they can't predict when it will stop." "Because I feel it," said Mr. Noé simply. The same way I felt 4,000 years ago when to start building the ark. The same way I knew with absolute certainty that rain would come and the world would change. Not rational explanation, just deep knowledge etched in the soul. He stood, moving to the bookshelf where he kept family albums and old documents. He opened a locked drawer and removed a wooden box. "I kept evidence," he said. "Not to prove it to others. I learned long ago that most people aren't ready to accept impossible truths. But I kept it for myself, to maintain sanity, to know I wasn't crazy." He opened the box, revealing dozens of notebooks filled with tiny handwriting, technical drawings, maps. Marina picked up one of the notebooks, the oldest. The date on the cover was 1945. Her grandfather would have been only 8 years old. She opened to a random page and saw a detailed drawing of a massive vessel with precise measurements noted in cubits, a unit of measurement that a Brazilian child of 8 in 1945 shouldn't have known. "This is," she began. "Diagram of the Ark," confirmed Mr. Noe. How Noah actually built it. Not the simplified version from children's books, but a vessel of sophisticated engineering with separate compartments for different species, ventilation system, rainwater collection, even provisions for waste disposal. He pointed to notes in the margins. "When I was 12, I calculated tonnage, load capacity, stability in rough waters. Years later, naval engineers confirmed that the design I drew as a child would, in fact, be seaworthy in extreme conditions." Roberto was flipping through another notebook, this one from 1952. "Dad, these are descriptions of animals, species you shouldn't have known about in 1952. Like the Ilipica," said Mr. Noe, "a mammal only officially discovered in 1983. Or the Saola, a Vietnamese antelope identified in 1992. I drew both decades before modern science discovered them because I remembered. I remembered putting them on the ark." Marina felt chills that had nothing to do with the cold water rising below. She was looking at children's drawings of animals that shouldn't exist in a 1950s child's knowledge, but that corresponded perfectly to species documented decades later. "And this," Mr. Noe pulled out a yellowed map, "is the geography of Mesopotamia before the flood. Rivers, cities, land formations. I drew it from memory when I was 15. He handed the map to Marina. "Compare it with recent archaeological discoveries. Especially research on the diluvial sediment layer found at multiple sites dated approximately 2900 BCE. The engineer in Marina wanted to dismiss it all as elaborate coincidence, but the amount of detail, the consistency through decades, the impossible accuracy. "Why never tell?" she asked. "Why keep it secret your whole life?" "Because I tried once," Mr. Noe replied sadly. "When I was 16, I told the parish priest. I was declared blasphemous. My mother was shamed. I spent months in counseling trying to convince me I was mentally ill." He touched the notebooks tenderly. "I learned to keep silent, live a normal life, marry, have children, work, but always with the knowledge, with the burden of knowing I had lived before, that I had survived the end of one world and helped seed the next." The rain continued relentlessly, but inside the house, something had changed. The family was no longer just waiting for the storm to pass. They were confronting an impossible possibility. "If this is true," said Roberto slowly, "if you really are the reincarnation of biblical Noah, why? Why return?" "Because the pattern repeats," answered Mr. Noe, looking at the window where water rose inexorably. "Humanity didn't learn the lesson of the flood, still destroys nature, still ignores warnings, still believes it's above consequences." He gestured to the storm outside. "This isn't a global flood, but it's a symptom. Climate change, increasingly frequent extreme events, rising oceans. We're walking toward another moment of reckoning with the planet. And you came back to warn? Marina asked. I came back to witness, Mr. Noé corrected. To remember, to perhaps help some prepare. That's why I built this house as I did. That's why I always insisted you learn to respect water, nature, balance. He smiled sadly. And to offer hope. Because I also remember what came after the flood. Rainbow, promise, new beginning, life persisting even after devastation. In the hours that followed, as the storm raged and water rose to exactly where Mr. Noé had predicted before stabilizing and beginning to recede, the family remained gathered on the second floor, and the old man told stories. Not sanitized biblical stories, but visceral memories of survival, of terror, of wonder before destruction and renewal. When dawn finally came, Porto Alegre was transformed. Entire neighborhoods flooded, thousands displaced. But the house on the highest point, built by a man who perhaps, just perhaps remembered another flood, remained standing. And Marina, looking at her grandfather, who had survived the impossible through planning that defied rational explanation, began to wonder, what if some souls really did carry memories across time? What if certain lessons were too important to be forgotten after just one lifetime? What if old Noé Silva, with his notebooks full of impossible knowledge, really did know something the rest of the world had forgotten? The truth, she realized, might be stranger and more important than she'd ever imagined. Chapter 2. The Evidence No One Could Ignore. In the days following the great Porto Alegre flood, as the city slowly recovered, the story of Mr. Noé Silva began to spread. Not through sensationalist media, but through something more powerful. Evidence impossible to ignore. Marina, whose civil engineering background made her a natural skeptic, spent the following week doing something she never imagined. Seriously investigating the possibility that her grandfather carried genuine memories from 4,000 years ago. She started with the notebooks. Photographed every page, every drawing, every annotation, then consulted colleagues, archaeologists, historians, specialists in ancient Mesopotamia. She didn't tell them about her grandfather's claims. Just asked, are these drawings and descriptions accurate? The answers were disturbing. This map of Mesopotamian irrigation systems is more accurate than some we have from excavations, said a professor of archaeology from UFRGS. Where did you get this? This description of naval construction techniques corresponds exactly to methods we know were used in the early Bronze Age, confirmed a specialist in maritime history. But this knowledge was only compiled in recent decades through intensive research. These animals, a curator from the Museum of Natural Sciences, fell silent for a long moment, studying children's drawings from 1950. Half of these species were only officially documented much later than this date. How? Marina had no answers, but she had growing evidence that her grandfather's knowledge transcended conventional explanations. It was Dr. Paulo Mendes, a neuroscientist from PUC specializing in memory and consciousness, who proposed the definitive test. I can't prove reincarnation, he admitted during a meeting at his clinic 2 weeks after the flood. But I can test whether your grandfather genuinely believes he has these memories versus confabulating or consciously lying, Mr. Noé immediately agreed to a battery of tests: functional MRI, electroencephalography, analysis of neurological response patterns while describing memories of the flood. The results, when they arrived, were extraordinary. Neurologically, explained Dr. Mendes to the gathered family, when Mr. Noé describes memories of the Ark and flood, his brain activates areas associated with genuine autobiographical memory, not areas of fantasy or confabulation. For his brain, these are real memories of lived events. But that doesn't prove they're memories of a past life, argued Roberto. Just that he believes they are. Correct, agreed Dr. Mendez. But there's something more. The brain activation pattern shows interesting characteristics. Normal memories have a certain decay. They become less sharp with time. But Mr. Noé's memories of the flood are abnormally vivid, stable, as if constantly accessed and reinforced. He showed colorful brain images, and there's this. During deep hypnosis, when I asked him to describe the flood, he began speaking in a language that linguists identified as an archaic dialect of Akkadian, an ancient Mesopotamian language. A language he never studied, never had contact with, yet he spoke it fluently for almost 10 minutes. The silence was absolute. "How is that possible?" whispered Marina. "I don't know," admitted Dr. Mendez. "Extremely elaborate cryptomnesia, access to information through unknown channels, or—" He hesitated. "Or something current science doesn't have a framework to explain." But it was Marina's discovery that really changed everything. Using her grandfather's 1953 maps showing pre-Diluvian geography, she compared them with recent geological data, especially studies on sedimentary layers at multiple Mesopotamian sites. "Look at this," she said, projecting images on her laptop during a family dinner. "Grandpa drew a river running here," she pointed to the old map, "that was supposedly covered by the flood and changed course." She pulled up a geological study published in 2023, and researchers using ground-penetrating radar found exactly that, an ancient riverbed under meters of sediment, exactly where Grandpa drew it 70 years ago. Roberto leaned forward. "Coincidence? There were 16 rivers on Grandpa's map. We've verified 12 so far. All correspond to ancient riverbeds detected by modern technology." Marina looked at her grandfather. "You saw them, didn't you? Saw how the geography was before everything changed?" Mr. Noé nodded slowly. "I remember every detail. Where rivers ran, where cities stood, how the land was before water erased everything." "There's more," Marina continued. "Grandpa always said the flood wasn't a global event. It was regional, but so devastating for Mesopotamian peoples that it seemed like the end of the world. Modern research confirms there's evidence of a massive catastrophic flood in Mesopotamia around 2900 BCE, possibly caused by the rupture of a natural dam." She showed scientific papers. Sediments, carbon dating, everything points to a real event that inspired flood myths in multiple cultures. And Grandpa's description of the cause, intense rains combined with melting glacier water and a natural dam giving way, corresponds exactly to what geologists now believe happened. "That still doesn't prove reincarnation," Roberto insisted, but his voice had less conviction. "Doesn't it explain coincidence after coincidence, impossible knowledge, accuracy that transcends chance?" She turned to her grandfather. "Grandpa, is there something else? Something that could provide definitive proof?" Mr. Noé was silent for a long moment. Finally, "There's one thing, but it requires travel and excavation." 3 months later, a small but determined expedition was on a mountainside in eastern Turkey, not far from the Iranian border, a location that Mr. Noé had specified from memory, using stars and land formations he recognized. "Here," he said, pointing to a specific rock outcropping. "Under here, we buried a time capsule, pieces of the Ark, seeds, a written record on a clay tablet, to prove we were real in case a future civilization questioned." Marina had used academic contacts to organize an official excavation with appropriate permissions. Turkish and international archaeologists watched with skepticism as they began to dig. 2 meters down, they found something. A stone box, sealed with bitumen. Inside, fragments of very ancient wood, petrified seeds, and a clay tablet with cuneiform writing. "My God," murmured Dr. Yilmaz, the lead archaeologist. "Preliminary dating suggests early Bronze Age, approximately 2900 BCE. The tablet was carefully photographed and translated. The text in archaic Sumerian said, "I, Utnapishtim, Sumerian name for Noah, built a great boat by divine command. I survived the great flood. I place this here to witness. We were real. The flood was real. The new beginning was real. For those who find this in future ages, learn, respect the waters, care for the earth, or the cycle will repeat." Dr. Yilmaz looked at Mr. Noé with an expression mixing shock and reverence. "How did you know where to find this?" "Because I buried it," answered Mr. Noé simply, 4,000 years ago, and I always knew where it was. I was just waiting for the right moment to reveal it. The discovery caused academic sensation. It didn't prove reincarnation. Nothing could definitively prove that. But the combination of evidence was undeniable. Impossible knowledge, transcendent accuracy, and now a physical artifact found exactly where an 87-year-old man said it would be. 6 months after the Porto Alegre flood, Mr. Noé gave his only public interview, not for a sensationalist tabloid, but for a serious documentary about memory, collective trauma, and the possibility of consciousness transcending death. "I don't know why I keep these memories," he said to the camera. "I don't know why I returned, if I really returned. But I know this. The original flood taught a lesson humanity forgot. That we're part of nature, not masters of it. That there are limits to how much we can exploit and destroy before the planet responds." He looked directly at the lens, eyes carrying the weight of millennia. Floods increasing, oceans rising, climate changing. It won't be a global flood again. The rainbow's promise ensures that, but there will be 1,000 small floods, 1,000 cities flooded, millions displaced. I built my house to survive because I remembered. And now I say, build your houses, literally and metaphorically, with wisdom. Prepare, adapt, respect the water. Because whether I'm really Noah reborn or just an old man with impossible memories, the message is the same. The waters are rising. And this time, there will be no ark to save only a chosen few. We need to save everyone, or we'll drown together. Mr. Noé Silva died peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, at age 89. That same week, Porto Alegre suffered another flood, smaller than the first, but significant, and this time, thanks to improved warning systems, increased preparation, and growing respect for the power of water, losses were minimized. In the house, on the highest point, built by a man who perhaps remembered another flood, Marina and her family remained safe. And in the notebooks left by her grandfather, they found a final message, written days before his death. "If no one else believes, that's okay. I knew the truth. I carried the burden and blessing of memory across millennia. Now I can rest. But before I leave, thank you for listening, for considering the impossible, for honoring the memory, my memory, of when waters covered the world and few survived to witness the new beginning. Take care of the waters. They remember, even if you forget. With eternal love across all lives, Noah, Mr. Noé. And below, a final drawing, a rainbow over receding waters. Promise, hope, renewal, always renewal. If this extraordinary story about the man who claimed to remember the biblical flood made you reflect on the mysteries of consciousness and memory, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell to not miss our next stories about souls that cross through time. And in the comments, we want to know, do you believe some people carry memories from past lives? Your opinion could open fascinating discussions. Join this journey through the mysteries of human existence.